The second thing is that Krauss says nothing about the Big Bang coming out of nothing. Admittedly, he comes clean on about 6 pages from the end of his book, and I don't know whether Richard has read it that far because he gave it a foreword. What he says is what Richard is describing as nothing is a sort of a mixture of particles and perhaps a vacuum with electromagnetic forces working on it. That's what Krauss is talking about under the heading of nothing. And there's a very good review of this in the New York Times, not a pro-religious paper at all, where Krauss is absolutely denied and demolished, although especially by his supporters claiming that he says things come out of nothing. He doesn't say that.
It's a matter,
you can quickly respond to that.
You can dispute exactly what's meant by nothing, but whatever it is, it's very, very simple. And why is that funny?
Well, I think it's a bit funny to be trying to define nothing.
You can dispute exactly what's meant by nothing, but whatever it is, it's very, very simple. The nothing that Lawrence Krauss is talking about, whether or not it's what a naive person would conceive as nothing or what a sophisticated physicist would consider to be nothing, it is going to be something much, much simpler than a creative intelligence. It is going to be something much, much simpler. Why is that funny? One of the things we've all met is the accusation that we are strident or arrogant or vitriolic or shrill. What do we think about that?
Let's all stop being so damned respectful. Let's all stop being so damned respectful.
One of the central arguments of the God Delusion, Richard Dawkins' book, is the famous schoolboy argument. If we believe in a creator, we'll have to ask who created the creator. Now, the first point I would make about that is this. If you ask the question, who created God, you are thinking of created gods. Now, the ancient world knew all about created gods. Actually, we call them idols. And people don't believe in them usually nowadays. So if Richard Dawkins really thinks that what he's demolishing is belief in created gods, then good for him. But he could have written a far shorter book, because millions of us don't need any convincing that created gods are a delusion. So that's the first point. And I believe it's quite a serious point, actually. Because if he thinks that the God means you must be able to say who created God, then he does fall foul of that criticism. Now, you can only ask the question, coming at it from another perspective, if you cannot conceive of an eternal God. Christianity, of course, does not believe in a created God. It believes in God who is eternal and is the creator of everything else. In other words, God is uncreated. So what I'm claiming, to use mathematical language, is that the category of the uncreated is not empty. Now, it could be that Richard Dawkins has difficulty with the notion of the uncreated. Although, and I'd like to know the answer to this, I don't know the answer to this, does he believe that matter and energy have existed forever? Because if he does, as many people do who are atheists, then they do believe in something eternal. So the problem must be that they can believe in something eternal, but they don't believe in an eternal person, an eternal God. But where's the logical difficulty? If you admit that something eternal exists, then postulating that an eternal person exists. On the other hand, if they believe that matter and energy are finite, we can ask them their own question: who created that? And who created whatever created that, and so on. You have an infinite regress unless you can see that the buck must stop somewhere. And of course the Christian doctrine is that God existed eternally, so that by definition the creation buck, so to speak, stops there. So I really think that in a way the game is given away by asking that question. Dawkins is thinking of created gods, which are a delusion.
When you say faith is rational and evidence-based, I mean, if that were true, it wouldn't need to be faith, would it? I mean, if there were evidence for it, why would you need to call it faith? You'd say just evidence. And when you said that faith in relativity, in Einstein's theory of relativity, is evidence-based, that of course it is. But the evidence is all important. I mean, Einstein's predictions fit in with observed fact and with a whole body of theory, whereas we only need to use the word faith when there isn't any evidence.
No, not at all. I presume you've got faith in your wife. Is there any evidence for that? On
Yes,
which you base it? Yes.
Plenty of evidence. Let's generalize it. Never mind about my wife. Let's generalize it. When you look at history, and let's leave aside, maybe I alluded to the possibility that some historians think Jesus never existed. I take that back. Jesus 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 existed.
Sir, what do you have to say? Because I assure you, for my life, it has been no delusion.
If you had been born in India, I dare say you would be saying the same thing about Lord Krishna and Lord Shiva. If you had been born in Afghanistan, I dare say you would be saying the same thing about Allah. If you had been born in Viking Norway, you would be saying the same thing about Wotan. If you had been born in Olympian Greece, you'd be saying the same thing about Zeus and Apollo.
Now, the problem with this sort of argument is that if you say that because belief in God is occasioned or caused in this way, therefore that belief is false, you commit an elementary logical fallacy known to every intro to philosophy student called the genetic fallacy. The genetic fallacy is trying to invalidate a point of view by showing how that view originated. And the fact that beliefs arise through people's wanting to feel better, or perhaps through causality, or even being hardwired into the brain, does nothing to prove that those beliefs are false, which is what he must prove if he's to show belief in God as a delusion. For example, it's been shown by child psychologists that children have hardwired into them the belief that when an object they see disappears behind a screen and then reappears, they believe that the object continues to exist when it goes out of sight. It doesn't disappear from being and then pop back into being. This is a hardwired belief in children, and yet I think none of us would say, therefore, that belief is false. Now, the fact is that some child psychology studies do indicate that children also have such an instinctive belief in God, and I'm inclined to view this as God's provision. Now, the skeptic, like Dr. Wolpert, thinks that this is a delusion. But then if he's to justify his view, he owes us some argument to show that the belief is false. Otherwise, he's committing the genetic fallacy. So the issue tonight before us in the debate is not how religious beliefs originate, it is whether or not those beliefs are true or false.
Just ask our audience a question, first of all, if you'd raise your hands. How many of you believe in God? Okay, a forest of hands. So, Richard Dawkins, these people are deluded. Every single one of them.
Well, I fear that's right, yes. I would say it's rather like the phenomenon of the imaginary friend that children have and that comfort them and console them, but there's actually not the slightest shred of evidence that any kind of supernatural being exists.
There are quite a number of different arguments for the existence of God. Let me just list some of them that I've defended in my work. One would be the contingency argument that holds that God is the best explanation of why anything at all exists rather than nothing. A second would be the Kalam cosmological argument, which argues that God is the best explanation for the origin of the universe at some time in the finite past. God brought the universe into being from nothing. A third argument would be the design argument, which holds that God is the best explanation for the remarkable fine-tuning of the initial conditions of the universe for intelligent life. Another argument would be the moral argument, that God is the best explanation for the existence of objective moral values and duties in the world. I would also think that the ontological argument for God's existence is a sound argument, which argues that the very possibility of God's existence implies his actuality, and that therefore if God is even possible, it follows that God exists. And finally, as I said, I think we can know that God exists through personally experiencing him as a kind of properly basic belief, in the same way that I know that the external world exists or that the past is real. I can know that God exists in that same sort of immediate, non-inferential way. So that would just be a list of various arguments for God's existence that I think are sound and persuasive arguments, and that I've defended in detail in my written work.
Because atheism is a faith, of course, as well.
It's not.
Of course it is.
Well, okay.
Don't you believe it?
It had to get there. I understand that you know, the physiology of it, if you will, but it had to come from somewhere. And that is the leap of faith that you guys make, that it just happened.
Well, a leap of faith, you don't actually need a leap of faith. You're the one who needs a leap of faith, because you are actually, the onus is on you to say why you believe in something. There's an infinite number of gods you could believe in. I take it you don't believe in Zeus or Apollo or Thor. You believe in, presumably, the Christian God, Jesus.
See, Jesus was a real guy. I could see him.
Yeah.
You know, and I know what he did. And so I'm not positive that Jesus is God, but I'm throwing in with Jesus rather than throwing in with you guys, because you guys can't tell me how it all got here. You guys don't know.
We're working on it. Physicists are working.
When you get it, then maybe I'll listen.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, if you look at the history of science over the centuries,
yeah,
the amount that's gained in knowledge each century is stupendous. In the beginning of the 21st century, we don't know everything. We have to be humble. We have to, in humility, say that there's a lot that we still don't know.
And, you know, being humble is a Christian virtue.
Well,
so, there you go.
Of course it is.
All right.
Don't know.
And, you know, being humble is a Christian virtue.
Well,
so, there you go.
Of course it is.
All right.
In the book.
Well, then who did create the heavens and the earth?
Why do you use the word who? You see, you immediately beg the question by using the word who.
Well, then how did it get created?
Well, by a very slow process.
Well, how did it start?
Nobody knows how it started. We know the kind of event that it must have been. We know the sort of event that must have happened for the origin of life.
And what was that?
It was the origin of the first self-replicating molecule.
Right, and how did that happen?
I told you we don't know.
So you have no idea how it started?
No, nor has anybody.
Nor has anyone else. What do you think is the possibility that intelligent design might turn out to be the answer to some issues in genetics or in evolution?
It could come about in the following way. It could be that at some earlier time, somewhere in the universe, a civilization evolved by probably some kind of Darwinian means to a very, very high level of technology, and designed a form of life that they seeded onto perhaps this planet. Now, that is a possibility and an intriguing possibility, and I suppose it's possible that you might find evidence for that if you look at the details of biochemistry, molecular biology. You might find a signature of some sort of designer.
Wait a second. Richard Dawkins thought intelligent design might be a legitimate pursuit?
And that designer could well be a higher intelligence from elsewhere in the universe. Well, but that higher intelligence would itself have had to have come about by some explicable or ultimately explicable process. It couldn't have just jumped into existence spontaneously. That's the point.
So Professor Dawkins was not against intelligent design, just certain types of designers, such as God.
However, if you're going to say that Jesus was born of a virgin, that Jesus walked on water, that he turned water into wine, that is palpably anti-scientific. There is no evidence for that. And if there were, you would be, well, I mean, no, there simply isn't any evidence for that, and no scientist could possibly take the idea seriously.
I can make it worse for you.
I know you can.